Okay, everybody. So I've known Dom for, I think it was around 2001, 2, I think maybe, when we first met. So we're going to do things slightly differently tonight. Normally what we do is we talk about journey and entrepreneurship, but we're going to flip it around a little bit. So Dom now does coaching.
Yes.
Yeah. And through his career at Rackspace and Pier 1 has basically come up with, produced a framework of 10 things that you believe will help you scale up, start up, etc. So we're going to go through these 10 things and talk through detail, and then the journey will appear as magically as we talk about these 10 points. We don't have any Top of the Pops music, unfortunately, but if somebody'd like to do that, then as we do it, that would be good. And we're going to take them in reverse order, so you need to stay to the end to hear the most important one. Okay, that's the trick. Is that okay?
Yeah,
do you want to give a brief intro before we do that, just about what you're doing and what you're doing now? That would be good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I set up Rackspace in Europe in 2001, and we will have met in 2002 because that was after the first piece of the one number you need to know. So we were looking we're looking to do a net promoter score survey with you.
Okay.
When you were at ClickTools. We took Rackspace to 26 million and 150 people in about 5 years. And then I went to an MSP in London called IT Lab, who were, after Lehman Brothers went bust, losing £65,000 a month. So stayed there for a couple of years and fixed that business for Sebastian. He then sold that to ECI a couple of years ago for 65 million. And then a Canadian business called Pier 1 asked me to set up a Rackspace competitor in the UK. So I said yes if we put it in Southampton. And they said, why Southampton? And I said, because it's like the Vancouver of England. And
you're in Bournemouth.
Yeah, no, I know, but the thing is though, everybody does laugh, but it's I said, well, it's got the 5th largest container port in Britain, it's the #1 cruise terminal, it's got the New Forest on its doorstep, and the executive team all brought their families to the New Forest at some point, and nobody ever thought that I'd lied to them. And ultimately we converted the derelict pub and office at the end of Town Quay, where you get the fast cat over to the Isle of Wight, into great office space. And we built the greenest data centre in the UK in Portsmouth, and we took that business to 30 million in the UK over 5 years, and globally we went from 90 million to 200 million, and we sold it in 2013. And I left there in 2014, just before my daughter was born. She's 5 in May, and so that's why I now do coaching, because I decided that actually, given the fact that I now live sort of near Salisbury, if I got another job in a tech firm as a CEO, it would likely to be London, possibly Thames Valley, but I wouldn't see the kids grow up, so I took a decision to not have a proper job. So.
Excellent. And so, funnily enough, I think the Pier 1 office may come into our first, into number 10. Because number 10, in at number 10, if I can do it properly, is environment. So here we have a ping pong table and a pool table. So do you want to talk about how you think environment's changed since the early days at Rackspace? Because certainly what you did at Rackspace was make a lot of cultural change, and talk about how environment and why you think it's important.
Well, I walked in tonight and I felt really right at home. That cladding's probably recycled pallets. Looks like to me a bit of grass on the fake grass on the floor. All things that I've used in the past. So when I arrived at Rackspace, we were in the US. We were headquartered in San Antonio in the Broadway Bank building, and I think there is something about being a startup, and if you look at HP or Apple in a garage, and there's something about having no money that is galvanizing, and so therefore having desks made out of old doors and mismatched furniture, but at some point you've got to have started to make some money, and then you want to attract great people, and there is a limit to how many great people you can attract to your office if it's a shit tip, because you get sort of past. I think it's like Jeff Moore crossing the chasm. There's a thing for that with recruiting staff, And right at the beginning, there's that sort of, you can get maybe 12 people to buy into your vision of the world, that you're going to change the world, and you can do it anywhere. But then past that, you want some people, because you go from being generalists to specialists. And when you start to then want to hire a specialist, they probably are working in an office with central heating or air conditioning, and a toilet and stuff, right? And otherwise they'd be camping, right? So, and so you've then got to then say, well, and at Pier 1 we were very deliberate. I mean, it's funny, at Rackspace, I got the budget to build the office, and in the US everything used to be cubes. And so I said, well, what's the budget for a cube? And they told me how much it was, and then we spent the money on Herman Miller Aeron chairs and better desks. And when the CEO turned over, he turned up in the UK at an absolute canary, because he thought we'd spent the money in the same way we did in the US, and I hadn't bothered to tell anybody we were doing something completely different, and that we had a games room and a cafe, and he was really not. But in the end, they copied all of those things. And at Pier 1, it was a deliberate decision in Southampton to build an office that people wanted to work in, because we wanted to be an employer of choice. And if you're trying to hire the best people, then you've got to have some good space. And then also, I think the space has an impact on the culture. And so, pool table, table tennis, video games. There's a lot of research that says, either take 10 minutes in every hour or 5 minutes in every half hour and do some dedicated effort. There's a new book out by Bruce Daisley called Joy of Work, and in that he's quite adamant that he thinks open plan offices are awful and the work of the devil. And I think if you have an open plan office, it can be busy and noisy and distracting. But if you build it right, you've created quiet space so that people do have work that they need to do. They can go and do it in another space. And so I think if you've got inspirational office, as you raise the bar and you say to people, the office space is part of us setting the bar. We're trying to change the world. We've got great space. We want to be a great business. And if your office space is shit, then why would anyone believe that you're trying to change the world?
I mean, I almost think it's made it worse for startups, because I don't think you can get away with a shit office anymore. You used to be able to do it, whereas now shared spaces almost set the bar, don't they? So if you're almost better off being in a shared space.
You've got to be better than WeWork.
Yeah, absolutely. Alrighty, so, and what we'll do is we'll take 3 or 4 of these, and then we'll open it up to questions on those topics, and then we'll come back if that's okay. Next one, structure. So presumably we're talking lots of middle management, lots of nice hierarchies are good.
Yeah, maybe. I think what my experience is, I read a great book called The Service Profit Chain, and then they did an update called The Service Value Chain. And you've come across the Dunbar number.
Yep.
So, something like 120. When you get past 120 relationships, your brain can't resolve them all into understanding the relationship between one and another. So as your business gets past 60 and towards 100, it becomes harder for you to be really sure that you've got no passengers in the business. And so some businesses like W.L. Gore won't have a factory with more than 100 employees, because they say that they can absolutely see a diseconomy of scale. And so what I think they've got at work there is the power of small teams. And so at Rackspace and at IT Lab and at Pier 1, and with some of the clients I now work with, one of the things we do is we say, okay, well, rather than having sales, marketing, customer service, technical support, and you have all of these silos where that silo is responsible for delivering that thing to customers, however big or small they are, you actually say, okay, well, and the way I've done it at a number of companies is we've split the revenue by 4, we've split the staff by 4, and basically we've created horizontal, vertical teams that deliver everything to a quarter of the customers. And so a quarter of the staff, so to give you an example, at IT Lab, we had a virtual team of 6 delivering everything to 10 customers. And at the other end of the scale, we had a virtual team the same size delivering all of the services to 350 customers.
And do you move the do you move the customers around, or is that once you're in that team?
So once you're in that team, you're in that team. Because at Pier 1, for example, we had one global support team. We had 45 people in a global support team. You could be a $50 customer on the phone to somebody in the support team, and there's $1 million a month customer on hold, waiting to talk to somebody. And so I said, well, we can't. That just seems mad. And so I got pushback from the guys in the US. It'd be okay if this was a Soviet collective, but actually this is the land of capitalism. And they're saying, well, we shouldn't do that. That's just not fair. Every customer's the same. And the organization had built itself so that support was delivered to all customers the same. And in the end, what we had to do is ring fence the team in San Antonio and say all of the small customers will get all of their support out of the San Antonio team, which will free us up to deliver better service to our larger customers, a small number of our larger customers.
I mean, do you think you could scale that from quite small? Do you think you could take a view that says, well, actually, that team is looking after 100 customers, whatever that number is, they're now at limit. So what we're going to do is we're going to build another team of 5 or 6 to look after our next 100 customers.
So I think specialization to me comes in really early.
Yeah.
If I've got 2 salespeople, one of them will become an account manager and one of them will do new business. And the same thing, then I would say, well, as soon as you possibly can, try and come up with a pod or a stripe or a team or whatever you want to call it, and go, that group of people is going to look after. And then it might be, the customer group might be by vertical segment, it might be by size, but when you do that, those teams then have a team leader, not a manager. There's somebody within the team, and that might not always be the salesperson. You get the opportunity to create people to show their potential management talents.
So I see quite a lot of organisations talking about leader rotation, where they sort of like almost vote the team leader in for a 6-month period and then rotate it around. Have you seen that? Have you come across that?
No, that sounds terrible.
I was interested if it was one of your ideas.
So I think one of the things is that nobody should have a job as a manager unless the skills they have are as a manager. And so, what are those management skills? Well, at Google, they've actually removed the managers no longer hire, fire, pay rise, or promote their staff. What they're left with, coaching. So, if you are, if the thing that gets you out of bed every morning is helping your team be better than they were yesterday, then you're probably a good manager. If it's because you've got a domain expertise, then that might not make you a great manager. And that happens often in businesses as they grow. You've been here a long time, we're going to make you the manager. You're the longest serving developer, you're going to be the head of development. Or same with sales. And often that it's then really hard to get those people out of the jobs that they actually weren't capable of doing.
Now one of the things I do want to talk about, and I think we'll do it in here, I'm not sure it fits anywhere else, is sales remuneration. Mm-hmm. So is this the place to talk about this? Wherever. So you've got this, if I'm right, you're a believer in not paying commission, aren't you? In certain cases.
Yeah, look, it's a bit like salary transparency. I think it's hard to change if it's not already there.
Yeah.
But I think that you pay salespeople commission because the product is shit. Okay. And if it wasn't shit, you wouldn't need to pay them commission because they wouldn't have a moral vacuum. They wouldn't be selling something to somebody that person didn't need. And often that's what happens with commission. In an organisation where, look, if it's transactional, I've had dinner several times with the guy who did run Foxton's sales team in London, and his view is that unless you're coin operated, you are not a salesperson. And I think that there are lots of great salespeople who are intrinsically motivated. And if you've got a great product that is actually the right thing for the client, then you don't need to pay commission because that salesperson will want to do the right thing for the client.
So do you think in that circumstance, if you were trying to hire a sales guy and not pay commission, certainly in the software industry, I suspect that would be quite a tough challenge because a lot of them are coin operated to a certain degree, aren't they?
So I'm not saying you don't have to pay the same money, right? You still have to pay the money.
Yeah,
and you still have the same metrics. So you still have a revenue target. You're just not remunerated against your revenue target. So one of the things I see all the time is, particularly in the hosting space, I've seen salespeople who aren't technically competent, and so they have to rely on the engineering teams a lot to win a deal. And then the engineering teams don't get any commission. The sales guy couldn't have done it on his own. And so that can cause some conflict in the organization that you might want to avoid. Or in a startup, you might be in a position where really the MD is the number one salesperson. And again, the whole organization is about supporting the MD to close deals. And then you go and try to hire another salesperson. You don't need to hire that other salesperson on commission. You'll be able to get somebody to do the work to support the MD on sales without having to pay a commission.
Yeah. And that may not be a traditional sales guy. It may be somebody who's maybe more suited to building relationships. And do you think? Or
well, I still think you have to enjoy winning. You still have to enjoy either you have to enjoy closing, or you've got to hate losing, one or the other. But what I do is I ask people when I'm interviewing salespeople, which I do a lot for clients, is I say to them, "What's your best deal?" And those people who say, "Well, I got an amazing check," or "It was the biggest deal that the company had ever done," I'm not so interested in. Where people say, "I did that deal, and this is the impact it had on the client," that's the sales guy I want to hire.
Yeah, that's good too.
I got hate mail though when I wrote that article on LinkedIn.
Did you really?
Yeah. Salespeople and sales directors contacted me and told me I was a wanker. So, good luck to them.
Excellent. Right. So at number 8, rhythm.
Yeah. Let me give you the example of what I'm not talking about. So in a big company, you have your annual performance review. So your boss sits you down and he says, "Andrew," if you can remember who you are, he says, "Andrew, these are all the things you do that are shit. These are all the things that the team don't like about you. These are all the personality flaws you're going to have to fix. Sadly, I can't give you a pay rise."
You've seen my last review.
So I think there's and also the annual. I've run a business before where we set the annual budget 6 months before the start of the next fiscal year. We get to the next fiscal year, the budget can't be changed. It's already obvious that we're not going to do the number that we've made up 6 months ago. And my bonus is I have to be within 5% plus or minus of the number that we made up 6 months ago. And it's already obvious we can't do that. And so that happens all the time. People set a 12-month revenue target or 12-month budget. Individual teams play their budget one against the other. And so it's just too far. So what I do is, and we used to do this at Rackspace, and then it was really clear at IT Lab, because when I took over, £65,000 a month loss, we had 3 months to save the company. And in that 3 months, you can get everybody to focus on one thing. And you can say, if it doesn't help us save the company, don't do it. Doesn't matter what it is, don't do it. And that level of clarity you can get all the time. You can say, right, this is the one number that we're gonna move the needle on in the next 90 days, and we're all going to focus on that. I was working with a client recently, and we said, right, improve productivity 10% in the 3 months to March, and they got there by the end of February. So the next 3 month cycle is going to be how do we grow the business by 10%, the top line revenue. And it's just that, it's a short enough time horizon, set some objectives, aim for them, make sure you've got complete clarity in the organization about what we're trying to do, and then also decide how we're going to celebrate that 3 months when we get there. And then for each individual, it's daily huddles, weekly one-on-ones with your manager, weekly team meetings, monthly meetings. And it's just trying to get into that, it's taking some of that agile software methodology and trying to say, well, what's great about that and how do we apply that to business? And that sort of daily stand-up, 15 minutes. What did I do yesterday? What am I committing to do today? What's getting in the way? How can my manager help me overcome that problem? And then you never get into a position where 12 months after having not done what your manager thought you were going to do, you find out that he wasn't happy. What a waste of time and effort. So that getting into that rhythm is, I think, really important.
And so one of the things that I find when I'm talking to startups and smaller organisations who are trying to grow is that a lot of them are almost scared to plan. But what I mean by that, they're almost scared to give themselves a target in 3 months or 4 months, or have no consciousness about a plan. Do you see that in larger orgs as well? Are there some that just seem to be floating along? Or do they all... Do you think you can't get to that stage without having a plan?
I think that often the budget, in larger organisations, the budget can get done. So there is a sales number that a group of executives have put on a piece of paper. But then it doesn't get communicated with anybody in the organisation, and people are completely at a loss about how the business is doing, where it's going, always.
And disconnected.
Yeah.
And you're a fan of OKRs, aren't you?
Yes.
And John Doyle. So can we talk a little bit about OKRs and how you think they work? Does everybody know what an OKR is? That may be the first.
Okay, so objective and key results. And one of the things I see often in organisations is that I see people not wanting to hold their colleagues accountable, or not having a mechanism for holding their colleagues accountable. So engineering might think the sales number is made up, but how could they, that sales are obviously experts, we're engineering, the sales guys don't tell us how to write code, we're not going to tell them how to go sell. But at an objective level, you could set an objective and you can get into good conflict and debate about making sure the objectives are set right. And the idea of setting an objective is that when you set it, you think it's only 70% achievable, so that over the next quarter, everything is a stretch goal. And then you break that down into some key results. So that might be, where have we got to? Have we got to here by here? By the end of the month, we want to be here. And so you're taking an objective and then you're breaking it down into a series of milestones. And then those organizational milestones get communicated down through the whole organization. And so we're sitting with you, and I'm your manager, and I'm saying, okay, well, what's your metric? What's your objective? That's the company objective. What's your contribution to that objective and key results? And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to do this. And then you might have some of your own. But then it means that when I'm doing my weekly one-to-one with you, I'm saying, Andrew, those 5 things for this quarter, how have you done on those 5 things this week? And we know that 3 of those roll up to the corporate objective, and the other 2 are something that you've picked. And I just think it's a great way. And if you can use some software tools, and a bit like when you do software development, you can roll it all the way up through the whole organization, and you can see whether are any of those things at red, amber, green. You can get a RAG rating on. Where have we got to drill down into? Where are the, we've got objectives that rely on each other. And so, knowing that that's the case. But I think that often I find in organizations that when people have a plan, their plan is quite woolly. And so you might say, well, I'm going to sell some stuff. Okay, that's not really very clear. Okay, I'm going to sell 10 things. Okay, that's brilliant. Who are you going to sell them to? Right? How are you going to get the data? And you start to be able to drill down, and you can help. It just brings a clarity, it brings a process and a thought process to try and get clarity. And what I do with organisations is I get them to write their objectives and key results, and then I get other people to mark their homework. Because you look at it and you think, well, that I think that's right. That's my objective and key results. But I give it to you, and you go, it seems a bit woolly to me, or I think your key results, and because you want everybody's results to be as difficult, that sort of sense of fairness that drives us all. You want engineering to feel like they've got as hard a goal as sales, or vice versa.
Excellent. Right, so we've done 3. Are there any questions on anything that we've talked about up till now?
So I think in a transactional sale, so here's the thing is that we might get onto this a bit in more detail, but if you and I are packing widgets in a box, and you're amazing and I'm just average, you'll be able to pack 2x as many widgets in a box as I can. If we get into something which uses mental dexterity, you could pay people the same money and you might be able to get somebody who's 10x or 100x better than average for no more money. And often when I look at, the things I come across are people say to me, I say to people, so how many of your sales team have hit their number in the last year? None of them. Okay, why are they all still here? Oh, well, they're not costing us that much because we're not having to pay them commission. And it's like, no, what they're costing you is the fact that you don't have somebody good in the seat. And at Pier 1, we hired 2 people at the same time. I had a lady from another industry who had never missed a quarterly number in 12 years. And I hired a graduate I hired a graduate who I met in a bar. She was she was serving tables in a bar, and I hired her in the bar. She closed 80% of the leads I gave her, and the other lady didn't close as many. And so hiring her cost me £500,000 of annualized revenue versus having Jess hit the number. And so I don't necessarily think that, and particularly account managers, you're paying often, and the company, the brand, the customer, the service delivery team do a great job. That customer will spend more money. Often people are paying account managers commission, and you don't need to pay that role commission. So I think where you might have to is in transactional jobs, because to get the best person. But lots of roles which are not new business or aren't transactional, I think you can, and I have been able to go and find people and find good people and put them on fixed salaries.
I have a problem with success management, actually, and CSMs. So a lot of CSMs are paid, a lot of the split I see is like a 70-30 split on commission, and then what ends up happening, they make 4 phone calls a year, the customer renews, and they get their 30% commission, when in effect it's support.
Yep.
And it's engineering who've delivered all the value to the customer, not the.
And in fact, if you went to market to try to hire those people and not pay commission, you'd find it absolutely fine to hire those people and not on commission.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, if you've already got a sales team and you're already paying them commission, it's almost impossible to get them off commission. But what I have done is, where I've had teams that are account managers, I've taken them off commission and just paid them a salary. I've paid them basically the average of what they earned in the last 12 months. So, some of the things that we've done in the past, I suppose it comes back to some of that rhythm. We would do an all hands meeting every month. The team leaders or the managers would stand up. They've got 5 minutes. They can say they sell 3 good news stories, and then say thank you to somebody not in their team who made their team's job possible this month, bottle of champagne. And then I'd get the staff to stand up and say thank you to somebody else in the organisation who did a great job. And you can see that type of stuff on the wall here. Because actually, the customer service that you deliver outside the organisation can never be better than the service that you get from one another inside the business. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to build, based on the sort of core values and the behaviours that you want the organisation to express, you're trying to get people to understand where the social currency is in the organisation. Yeah. And so, to me, part of that job well done, we did at Pier 1, we did, or even at Rackspace right at the beginning, before we had core values, somebody came to me, Anne came to me and said one of the sales guys was an idiot and we should fire him. And so we wrote 15 behaviours and we rated the whole team. Everybody in the company rated everybody else on a scale of 1 to 5 on these 15 behaviours. And the person who came top got a weekend away with their partner in a hotel, and the person at the bottom had a chat with me. And it was just, it's just trying to, T&T, the parcel guys, I was at talk with one of their execs years ago, and at Pier 1, because we had a globally distributed workforce, what we did is we gave people the opportunity, rather than to give cash, to give points, and you could spend those points on company swag. So you could spot the people in the organisation who'd been thanked because they had positive points balances, but the sort of the inverse of that is you could spot the people who never got thanked. and you could spot the managers of the teams who never had anybody in them who got thanked. And so you could spot those black holes in your organisation where nobody, they did an awful job inside the business, and you could then go and address that. Well, if you're a salesperson, you've got to sell. That's your job. So you get rid of them. Or if they're a great values fit for your business and everybody loves them, you find them a different job. So I think the things I do in organisations is because I actually hate hiring. I hate firing people. I fired a lot of people, but I don't like doing it. And so I would much rather narrow the role that they've got and try and get them into a narrower role. Or if they're a great fit but sales just isn't them, is there a customer service role or some other job in the organisation that they would be great at? But certainly if there isn't and their job is sales, then they've got to go. I also don't just set them a revenue target. I work out what the activity targets are. So one of the things is everybody in the organisation has to know every day what a great day looks like. And so a salesperson, it might not be a sale every day. It might be that they have to have 5 meaningful conversations. And therefore, they have to record those 5 meaningful conversations. And in their one-to-one huddle, in their team huddle every day, they would say, I did 5 or I did 6 or I did 4. And what's stopping me doing 5? What am I going to do tomorrow? I'm going to do another 5. And so that whole, every day people need to be able to say, I did a great day. Had a great day at work today, tick. Because people have a KPI or KPIs around what they're trying to do.
Excellent. Right, we're going to do the next 2 together. So it's meetings and candor.
Okay, right.
If that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I think they're sort of related.
Maybe. The thing is, I've spent a lot of time in meetings. I've spent a lot of time in meetings that I didn't need to be in. And I see that all the time with clients. I was with somebody recently who spends 80% of his week in meetings. And most of the time, if you ask people, who's been in a great meeting in the last month? Okay.
That was with me. You can't include that.
Right.
That was a joke, by the way.
About 4 people out of the whole audience have been in a great meeting in the last month, right? And so we all spend a lot of time in meetings. And if you say to people, what would make this meeting better? People will give you a long list of stuff. And so it's weird, right? We all know the answer, and then we just go with the flow. And the flows are awful. And so I think in an organisation that wants to be great, and I said this to a client last year, I said, you've told me you want to be great, but let me give you some feedback on how I felt today when, nobody turned up on time. Everybody sat there on their phones, even though the CEO, actually they didn't for the first hour because the CEO said no tech, but at 10 o'clock when he left, everyone got their phones out. We went for breaks and we said, will everybody be back in 10 minutes? Everybody said yes. One guy came back 20 minutes later and one bloke never came back at all. And it's like that, just a lack of respect for everybody else in the room. And this is the senior team in a business. And if they're like that with me, they're going to be like that with everybody else in the business. And so it's just tightening up some of that stuff. Like, let's agree how we're going to behave, and then let's behave that way. And, having an agenda, have a context. Why are we here? And then let's agree what the most important thing, this group of people has got together for a reason. What is it? What are the most important things that we're going to discuss and agree on now? And so that most senior person in the room doesn't need to be the chairman. They don't need to set the agenda. If somebody invites you to a meeting and you're not sure why, don't go. If it's boring as shit, get up and walk out. At the end, you should take some time at the end to say, how do you think the meeting went on a scale of 1 to 10? The first bit of the meeting should be share some good news. Google found that building psychological safety is important to teams, and just sharing a bit of good news at the beginning of the meeting sets the tone for psychological safety, and that everyone else will have the same airtime, and that's really important. One person takes a shared set of notes. You can put it on the screen, Google Docs or whatever. One set of notes so that everybody else can put their tech away. Turn your phone on airplane mode. Just having your phone on the table reduces your IQ by 20 to 30 points. Put it in your bag. It's just these things about be present in the meeting and have a great meeting deliberately, as opposed to just sort of drifting through on autopilot. We had a long debate with one client where a couple of people said, but where would I get my email done if I can't sit at the back and do email whilst I'm in a meeting? And so, it's like, well, that's not the point, right? The point is, anyway, or do video instead of phone if you're going to do, electronically, because then people are less likely to be doing their email. And again, it's about being present, because if you're in a meeting with people and they're not present, it's just a crap meeting. Yeah. One or two people are talking to each other and the rest of the people may as well not be there. The candor thing is, if I had spinach in my teeth, would you tell me?
Yeah.
Okay. What if I?
Well, I would.
Yes. Well, you know me, right?
Yeah.
So when I do that with clients, about 30% of the people say that they wouldn't tell the person sitting next to them that they had spinach in their teeth.
Really? Wow.
Right? And so then I go, okay, what if I had BO? And that number drops to about 1 in 10 people would tell me I had BO, whereas 60, 70% of people would tell me I had spinach in my teeth. And what I'm trying to get to is that then I say, well, what if you were smelly all week and on Friday you realised I could have told you were a bit smelly on Monday? How would you feel? You'd feel like I'd really let you down. I'd put you into an embarrassing situation that you didn't need to be in. But I was thinking about me. I was thinking about how difficult it's going to be about me to tell you that you're smelly. And so some of this stuff is about radical candor, Kim Scott's book, where she says, look, this is about being direct with people because you care about them. And if you can get your communication into that space where, you only have difficult conversations with people when they're in the room, you don't talk about them behind their back. If you're standing waiting for your coffee in the morning at Costa or Starbucks and you think, who is the one person from the company you don't want to bump into? They're the person that you need to go and spend some time with, because that's the relationship that's most broken. And it's about how do you fix that, right? Or when you're having a meeting and you're debating a topic, let's not get personal, but let's make sure that we really press each other hard. And so that's one of the things that happens in high-performing teams. And I find that that's really difficult for people to get their heads around. If you're an Uber driver, right, and every time you get an Uber, you get a rating. You only get 5s and 1s. Nobody has ever rated an Uber driver 2, 3, or 4. And so what happens is if your average rating as an Uber driver drops to 4.5, there's an intervention, because you are now it's unacceptable, because it should be all 5s and then maybe an occasional 1. And I think it's the same with candor, where people think that they're being quite direct. They're probably not even making a difference, and so you've got to be much more direct and deliberate, and it's very uncomfortable, and you've got to practice it. And so when you can do that, you can have the pace with which the organisation can move picks up. So at Pier 1, we had a rule at the executive team level which was no triangulation. So if you came to me and complained about Marcus, I would say, well, that's great. I'm going to give you 72 hours to have that conversation with Marcus, and then I'm going to talk to him and make sure that you've had that conversation. And so we forced ourselves to keep us to have difficult conversations, and we kept that in the team for 6 months before we rolled it out into the company, because it's just hard, but it makes such a massive difference.
Excellent. We've still got 5 to go. Right. God, I'm not going to put the glass on. Engagement.
There's 2 things there. One is staff and one is customers.
Yeah.
And so I've used Net Promoter Score, NPS, to measure customer engagement. Ever since Fred Reichel wrote his article in the Harvard Business Review, we rolled it out at Rackspace with ClickTools pretty much straight away after that. And that is just trying to create. So if I said to you, Andrew, you're amazing, like, it might make you feel warm and fuzzy, but you can't change anything. And so the thing is, you've got to go and seek criticism. And so Net Promoter Score, would you recommend Andrew to a friend or colleague on a scale of 0 to 10? And what you're after is you're after 9s and 10s.
That's not a real question. I don't want to know.
And so measuring customer engagement, and then asking for the feedback about why you got that, and then going back to customers and saying thank you for your feedback. This is what we've changed in our business as a result. Drives customer engagement, and again, it's about setting a high bar. So when we were at Rackspace, First Direct had scores in the 70s and 80s, and so that was our benchmark. We wanted to be up there. We didn't want to be 14 to 25 like the rest of the IT industry, and we got there. And
do you use Gallup stuff for? Did you use Gallup stuff for employee?
Yeah, the Gallup Q12.
Yeah,
and I still use that. In fact, one of the clients I work with down in Australia has just adopted the Q12 as their staff engagement model. And there's a couple of things in there that are so. In the UK, Gallup reckon only 8% of employees in the UK are engaged. But what's at stake for you if you can drive engagement is the Sunday Times Best Company stuff. What they say is that those engaged employees will work 30% longer hours for 5% less pay and be happier.
Okay.
And what you've got is basically 40% discretionary effort. If you come to work and do an okay job, you won't get fired. Well, that's probably the 60% effort mark. And what's at stake is the other 40%. I walk into boardrooms and do all the chairs match? Is any of them broken? Are any of the lights flickering? And do the pens work? And so often you walk in and you go, broken chair in the corner, light flickering, you pick up a couple of markers and none of them work. That's a company where there's no discretionary effort, because somebody else in that company will have picked up that marker and they'll have decided to just put it back where it was and not put it in the bin and buy some more. And in companies that are just hitting it, you walk into reception and 10 people in the first 10 minutes ask you if you're okay and have you got everything, and does the people you're coming to see know you're here. And so that's sort of measuring employee engagement, measuring customer engagement, and finding an external benchmark and then trying to be world class. In Gallup, the first question is, I know what's expected of me every day. And that to me links back to OKRs. And so counterintuitively, deploying something like OKRs or KPIs or having a scorecard actually drives employee engagement. Absolutely.
And there's a common thread to this that will become clearer as we get closer to the number one. And we'll take the next two together. Principles and values.
They're similar. So I think principles rather than rules is because in bureaucracy gets developed as any organisation grows, and what often happens is the rules get written for the 2% of people who didn't do what people thought was the right thing, and the right thing is the values. The values are a shorthand way of describing the behaviours. And I was interviewing a lady called Liz Robinson last year, and Liz was the youngest head teacher in the UK, and she took over 12 years ago. She took over one of the worst schools in the country. It's Old Kent. Is Old Kent Road the cheapest space on the Monopoly board? Yeah. So it's just off Old Kent Road, right? It's an old Victorian school building surrounded by concrete tower blocks. And to get to the school, you basically have to drive underneath one of the tower blocks. And the taxi driver said, "Mate, are you sure this is where you need to be?" It looks as though but you can tell people don't have curtains. They've got blankets hanging up in the windows of these tower blocks. It looks rough as shit. And she took over this school, and she said on the first day she had an epiphany. A teacher brought a child in by the ear and said, "Miss Robinson, this child doesn't know how to behave." And she thought, they wouldn't have brought the kid in and said, "This child doesn't know how to read," because they would have realised that the job of a teacher is to teach a child to read. And so then she realised that actually, if you want people to behave in a certain way, you have to teach them. Because people won't know. Like, she's got 95% of her kids don't have English as a first language. So there's a massive cultural difference. And she has no rules. What she has is just values. She runs the school on 5 values. And that whole idea of having values and having behaviours in an organisation and then teaching them. And to your question earlier about how do you do staff how do you do job well done? Every time we said job well done to anybody, it was referring back to a behaviour, referring back to a value, showing that you could get social currency in the organisation by behaving in the right way.
I was just going to ask on the values thing. How often do you go into organisations where the values are clear but just not acted on by the leadership team?
That happens quite a lot. People think doing values is a good thing to do, so they do it. I was with somebody last year, and I just said to them, I don't think your values are wrong. I just don't think you're living them enough. They're not alive in the organisation. They're not being remarked upon every day by everybody. And so people do a bit of it, but they're not all in. And if you're not going to go all in, you sort of may as well not bother.
And do you think that's because people take or adopt sets of values that they think they should, rather than values that they are able to live? Like day in, day out from a leadership perspective.
What's interesting is that the leadership value, the values that if you're an executive, I'd probably have set a higher standard for you than for a frontline employee. And quite often people have got something, they've got a value, but then they haven't linked it to behaviours. And it's like, well, what does that mean in this organisation? And what does that mean for you or for me? And helping people clarify what's right and what's not right. Quite often I do work where we try and get into team charters. So here's the values, but in our team, this is the way we're going to behave that are congruent with the company values.
Okay.
And a Nationwide Building Society a few years ago, I saw that they had values, and the values were the same. They're called, it's pride is the way in which their values stack up. But for the executive team, they had different behaviours than for the cashiers. And so quite often people don't get into that level of detail.
That's interesting. Right, we've got two more to talk about. There are a couple of questions I'll ask as well. But second, purpose.
Yes. Well, I mean, we were talking about this before. So when I originally wrote this list, purpose was number one, and then I put something else number one. But then I was with the client last week, and he said, "But without purpose, nothing else matters." So I just think it's like it's the why. Simon Sinek, great TED talk on why, and I think it goes back to my thing about if you've got salespeople who are selling something and there's no why, there's no obvious customer benefit, then it's difficult. I was working with a corporate finance house recently, and the project was to teach the accountants to sell, and I asked them what they thought sales was, and they said salespeople are pushy, slimy, unethical. They thought second-hand car dealers double glazing, and I said, well, we won't want to do any sales training then. But do you think your company sells the best product in the market? If you lose a pitch, does the client get a worse outcome because they didn't pick you? And every single person in the firm said yes. Every single person I spoke to said, absolutely, we are better than our competitors. And I said, well, in that case, it's ethical for me to help you sell more, right? Because, you're absolutely sure. And that organisation sees its purpose as helping entrepreneurs get the most value for their life's work. And that's the purpose of that organisation. You can see it in the people and the work they do. What you can't do is you can't see it in the way in which their website, their go-to-market, their office space, that's completely lacking there. And so that's actually one of the conversations I'm having with them at the moment, is that the purpose is live in the people, but it's not obvious to prospective clients. And I think then if it's more congruent to your customers and your staff, then it's really powerful. Look at Rackspace, we had fanatical support, and that was a high bar, because at the point where, as an organisation, we set that as our strapline, the support was a bit shit. It certainly wasn't any better than anybody else's, but it forced us to aim high, and then it set a high bar for everything else we did. And I remember at one point, we'd hired a load of, I suppose at graduates, and so we'd been there a few years, and these ladies, some of them were thinking about, getting married, starting a family, and they said, look, our maternity benefits are not fanatical. They're actually just legal minimum. And so if fanatical support is we're going to be fanatical about everything, then here's a thing that undermines everything that we do. So we put a team together and we said, right, let's fix that. So we've got world-class maternity benefit.
So that almost became a purpose and a value to a certain degree. It wasn't so much of a purpose, but it became something that Rackspace became. The amount of brand value you got from that fanatical support stuff was quite huge, compelling, which was massive, wasn't it?
And they've just dropped it. They've just dropped it, yeah.
But so it almost became value, didn't it, as well?
Yeah, well, it certainly if a value is a shorthand for behaviour, then it certainly was a shorthand for behaviours, and we used the fanatical sort of microscope across everything that happened in the business, and it drove change in behaviours.
So there has been, I think, a pretty common thread through the whole of the top 10, and it's the one thing that we haven't mentioned yet. Does anybody like to guess what number 1 is? Marcus, you don't, because you know you cheat. Anybody? I think you all know, you're just a bit shy. So number 1 is talent.
Yeah.
Do you want to start? Actually, could you start by telling the Pier 1 story?
Yeah. What, from the beginning?
It depends how long you want to take to the punchline that you told Marcus and I before when we were standing at the table over there about closing the. That was Pier 1, wasn't it? When you closed within 120 miles.
120 miles.
so nobody could get a job.
Nobody could get a job. What?
Don't worry.
I'm totally.
We'll go back to it. Let's talk about talent.
It was only 20 minutes ago, I know. And blimey. Okay, talent. Do you want me to tell the P1 story?
Go on. Yeah.
Look, so it was. I was living in London, but had a place in Lymington, and it was my wife always has the best idea. So when they actually said they wanted to hire me, she said, "Well, only if we can do it in Southampton," which is why it was then in Southampton. But to link it to talent, that having done Rackspace from scratch and getting to 150 people, and then taken over IT Lab, and having to swap out a load of staff. And it was at Pipex.
Sorry.
Yeah, so what I took over after I left Rackspace, before I went to IT Lab, I was MD at Pipex. And I walked in on the first day, and the first thing that the first person said to me is, HR, I'll have you for those. I was wearing jeans, because I haven't worn a suit in a long time. And I went, I'm the new MD. And they went, that doesn't matter. They'll have you for that. And so I sent an email around to the whole company, 120 people. I said, look, built my reputation on building great places to work, great service, What should we fix today? Like, what is it that you want me to fix? I'm the new managing director. Just, tell me what you want me to fix. I went to IT in the afternoon and I said, look, does my email not work? Because I've had no replies to that email I sent. And they went, no, it works. It's just nobody gives a shit. So the office lease came up, and I moved the location of our business 120 miles away, so nobody who worked at the existing business could come and work in the new location. I hired 6 of them to come and train the new workforce for 6 months. And because the board slightly vacillated on how long we had to do it, we had 4 weeks to hire 99 people. So I hired the guys that Asda use when they open a new supermarket, and they had people in bikinis in shopping centres handing out flyers and balloons and local radio ads, and we had put 8,000 people in the first week through Selection Centre, 1,000 a night for 8 days, and in the end we hired 99 people in 4 weeks. So when people say to me they have a recruitment challenge, I'm slightly sceptical. And we hired better people. I mean, what they'd had a policy of if anybody left, the manager probably didn't get the headcount back. And so the managers had been working for 4 years before I got there on the basis that somebody's better than nobody. And so the quality in the team had just gone down and down and down and down and down.
And that leads us nicely into talking about the current debate about A players and B players, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on it?
Well, there was an article that I read the other week by somebody in the EO organisation, and he was saying there's a role in every company for B players. I don't think he used the term plodder, but B players. And maybe we're talking about, maybe our definition of A and B is different, but to me an A player, it's not Jack Welch where it's take the top 10% and they're A's and the bottom 10% C's, you fire them. It's not stack ranking. To me an A player is the 5 to 10% available talent in any location for any salary for a given job. And that's what your aim should be. Look, at any point 10% of your people are probably off their game for something that, I don't know, the hamster died or something, right? So you'll have 10% of people who aren't A's today, but the aim should be that the other 90% should be A's or A potential. And that should be your aim. And you should review that every quarter. So Jim Collins says, every month, every manager should ask themselves about everybody in their team. Knowing what I know about them today, would I be sad if they resigned, and would I rehire them tomorrow? And if you can't be honest with yourself, and what happens, you tend to find out when you apply that, would you enthusiastically rehire thing, people go no. And then quite often what I find is that, I get often asked by clients to fix problems which are actually symptoms of the fact that they don't believe they could hire better people. So they're trying to build a system around mediocre people or average people, and talent isn't a bell curve, it's a power law. So you don't have to pay more, but you can get people on the same money who are 10 times better than average. Google reckons their engineers are 100 times the average. Netflix pay 25% above market because they think they've got A players. And if somebody fails to pass their, if somebody's not an A player, they pay them to leave because you are depriving an A player of the chair. And that A player could be 10x average. And so that sort of compound interest in your business, every day, every month, you've got better people than the competition doing 10x the work of the competition. It's just staggering. Even if you've got average people and you get them engaged, you get 40%, almost double. And so it's just, it's just about talent. You've got to build the business on amazing people.
So do you think a bad hire is worse than no hire?
Yeah, because you
is that all the time?
Well, you see, what happens is it's the sort of sunk cost fallacy, right? So you think, oh God, you meet them on day one and you think, oh shit, we've hired a nutter. And then 3 months later, they're still there because you're trying to persuade yourself they're not a nutter. Because you don't want to go back through the process of recruiting again because it took you 6 months and it cost you a load of money. And so that happens all the time. We try as human beings to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so I think what you've got to do is you've got to build a really rigorous recruitment process. You've got to do two things. You've got to go into the market to attract people. You do not have a God-given right to attract amazing talent unless you're already a huge brand. And so you've got to work really hard. You've got to write different job ads. You've got to do search. You've got to have something about your organisation that would make the best employer of your competitor come and work for you rather than stay where they are, given that they're successful where they are. And so it's like, how do I create a business, or how do I create a set of benefits, or how do I create a job that would take that employee from my competitor? And it may be that you don't need to recruit from your competitors, but unless your employer brand or your proposition is strong enough to attract great people. But then once you've got a few great people want to work with great people. So then when you bring in somebody else great and they see the quality that they get to work with, it becomes self-reinforcing, unless, as Guy Kawasaki said, A players hire A players and B players hire C players, and it can go to shit in a heartbeat. And so building a robust recruitment plan, one of the things is, if you and I were interviewing, we'd lie to candidates. Like, we wouldn't do it on purpose, but we'd have rose-tinted spectacles about how good this job was. And so, go get any candidate, go spend time with the team that they're going to work for or work with. Get the team to have a veto if it's a good team. because they'll spot things that you didn't spot. Test people, get them to do the job for you. People like WordPress get people to work part-time for them before they give them a full-time gig. So you can actually see what the quality of their output's like. I find the hardest job to hire for is project managers. I haven't come up with yet a decent test for project managers, but most other roles I've found a way of testing their competence before hiring them.
Excellent. Right. Who's got a question?
When I do the talent review with clients on a quarterly basis, it's basically a 6-box grid. So across the top is A players, B players, and C players, but they are people who live the values. And then you've got the people who don't live the values, who are, and in that case, an A is exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, and not meeting expectations. And below the line, you've got everyone who they don't believe it actually lives the values in the organisation. And sometimes you've got people who are exceeding expectations, but not living the values. And they're often salespeople or network engineers. Somebody with a talent, what the organisation believes is a rare talent, so they put up with them being a total dick. And so you've got to get rid of them, and that can often be hard because the organisation thinks that they're rare and they're difficult to find. So you've got to go and fix that. And when you do, the whole organisation breathes a sigh of relief and says, management aren't as stupid as we thought they were. They actually realised this guy was a dick and we got rid of him. And then you've got the B's and the C's. So then you've got the B's who could be an A, and sometimes it's not fair because they haven't had any feedback. So the manager says, they're a B. Do they know that? No. Okay, well, let's start with that. Why don't we start with telling them where we think they currently underperform? Where are they not meeting expectations? And then you've got some C's, and it's like, well, have they always been a C? Were they a B, but now they're a C? Is there something else? Could we narrow their role? Because if they fit on values, I'll give them a second chance or maybe even a third chance. What's on there's nothing on the whiteboard unless the children have scribbled on it. But I do think that even me as a sole entrepreneur, or I'm in business and there's just me, I still have a purpose, and I've still written down my values, and I've still thought about what I'm trying to do with my business, and I still have a plan about where I want this business to be in 36 months' time.
I think the other thing I'd say on that is that unless you get a lot of this stuff, all of those 10 points, unless you get it down and nailed for employee number 1 or employee number 2, you can't correct it once there's 8 of you. Because all of a sudden you've got a hell of a, and I've been out, so you've got a hell of a mess that you've got to sort out. So you may not go to the extents of some of it, but you've certainly got to be thinking about what values do I want in the company, what values represent me in the business, where are we going to work, how am I going to pay my people, do I want an A player or do I not? If you want an A player, you need to go and get them from day one. Don't go and hire the first guy who comes along and says, I fancy a job, because you just end up having to sort out bigger problems further down the road. So I think it's incumbent upon everybody that starts a business to think through those things, maybe to a slightly less degree, but you've certainly got to be cognizant of them.
So when I was in the businesses I've run, the financial numbers were great, but when I reflected back and thought what gave me the most joy, it was actually hiring people where I thought I could see potential in them that they couldn't see in themselves, and then helping them on that journey, so that hiring graduates who became sales directors, or hiring a guy who was a cable puller in Bournemouth and he ended up being a cybersecurity expert, and helping those people because I just thought they had the right attitude, and having a business meant I could help them. And now as a coach, the clients that I work with, I get a sense of joy and satisfaction out of having an impact in the leadership team and throughout those businesses. And if those businesses are great places to work, then all of those people come to work on a Monday with a spring in their step and go home on a Friday and don't kick the dog and punch the wife or whatever they do.
As a a coach, how soon do you know whether you can work with a client or not?
Well, I meet the CEO and I can't work with some of them, but sometimes I work with the CEO and the way in which they describe their business, that's not how it is when you get in. And so what I do when I'm working with a client is I say, look, we're getting into this thinking this is at least a 12-month engagement, but in the first 90 days, either of us has the right to cancel. Because I might go and do a session with the leadership team. In fact, one of the things I do to take my own medicine, because I say I hire a candidate, but before I allow them to start, I want them to spend some time with the team. What I do is I'll go and do a sort of a 3-hour session with the leadership team. No obligation. They haven't paid any money. We haven't signed a contract, but I just want to work with the team to see whether I think I can help them.
Because one of the things that you talk about is, and it's come across tonight, is clearly how much you read and listen to stuff.
Yes.
And then the other thing that you were interested in is like whether people consider themselves to be lucky, isn't it?
Yeah. There is. It's one of the interview questions that I now ask everybody. So I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how lucky do you think you are? And what I'm after is I'm after people who give me an 8 or a 9 or a 10, because lucky people don't blame other people, and they're more resilient. And in fact, one of my clients gave me a fantastic example of that. He's a triathlete, and he was on holiday. He was off to be doing some triathlon somewhere in Europe, and he was on holiday with his family in Italy. And he came back, and I met him for a coaching session. And he said, "Oh, let's have a beer." I said, "I thought you were doing this triathlon." And he went, "No, I've had an accident." So then he said, there we were in Italy, and he said, I realised I hadn't done any box jumps that day, and I'm standing next to this stone bench. He said, I just finished the call, and I went to jump up onto the bench. He said, and I slipped, and my legs ran down the side at the front of this stone bench. He said, 48 stitches in my shins. I was in the hospital till 4 o'clock in the morning. He said, to start with, I was lying on the floor screaming, and nobody came. They were all having a sort of family party over here. And so I said, God, that's terrible. He went, yeah, but it could have been worse. I could have smashed my chin. And it's just like lucky people always go, it doesn't matter what happens to them. They just have that sort of positive outlook. Yeah. And so hiring positive people definitely, hiring lucky people definitely is a good thing to do.
And how important do you think the reading thing is?
Well, there's a number of people who say, you have to read. And various estimates say that, look, successful CEOs read at least 24 books a year. So they read 2 books a month. I do a bit better than that. I read 2 books a week. But I know that's because I'm mad. So, and I'm basically audible. I probably read maybe high double digits paper books, but everything else I consume on Audible. There's a great book called First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham, and he says, it's subtitled What the Best Managers Know, and he said what managers do is they spend 80% of their time with their best people, and actually that tends to be the reverse. Often managers, there's another stat which I saw which says people spend 2% of their time recruiting and then 72% of the time dealing with the problems they cause themselves by not being very good at recruiting. And so, that, I think if you can spend time with your A players and help. Look, when I was, my first job out of university was working at M&S. And so in retail, that aisle end, what's your best space? You put your best line in your best space because that gives you the most return per square foot. And so if you're a manager and you can have any positive impact on your people, then spend the most of the time you've got available with your best people, because that will help you hit the team goal. I think some of it's around expectation and daily feedback. And quite often I find that that's missing. The people who end up being managers, there was a great slide from Silicon Beach a couple of years ago, and it's like, we've all worked for leaders who are shit, but nobody's ever had any leadership training, so guess what? We'll all end up being shit leaders. And it's that sort of, if you've never worked for somebody who's a great manager, then it's very difficult to learn those skills. So, be a great manager, do one-to-ones with your team, set expectations. And what I find is when you're really clear about what the expectations are, you don't have to fire people. They just leave. because who wants to come to work every day and fail to meet expectations? As long as they're reasonable. Yeah, so when I'm sitting down with the CEO, if their biggest challenge is strategy, which I think it should be, and for me, strategy is next year's profit. Another way of thinking about it is next year's profit. I think they should be spending 4 days a week on next year's profit, because that's their job and nobody else has that job except them. I think that no company performs better than the leadership team works as a team. And at Pier 1, the team was spread across 3 countries, 2 continents and 7 cities. And so when the CEO, Gary Sherlock, took over, he said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to go off-site for a week a quarter, and we're not going to work on the business, we're going to work on the interpersonal relationships in this team. And we rented a house and we cooked for each other for 3 days, and we worked on the team, because if you can't trust each other on the other side of the world, we just won't be able to move things forward. And so I think that building the relationships and the trust in the team is absolutely fundamental. And actually, I don't think you can build a strategy unless you've got that trust, because people, there won't be enough conflict. You won't get the right answer. And so that's what I spend a lot of my time doing with clients is how do we get the leadership team to work better together, become a high-performing team so that the company can become high-performing. And so if they're not spending, and quite often that's the case, people are not spending enough time, they're not investing enough time, we're too busy, we can't invest in this. And actually, that's where I say, look, if you're not prepared to invest the time, then I can't help you. Because you know what the problem is, but you're not prepared to fix it.
Thank you, Dom. That was absolutely superb. Lots of great information, knowledge. Thank you, everybody. If we just say thank you to Dom in the normal way, that would be excellent. Thank you very much.